Hey everybody, welcome this afternoon. Thanks for coming to the BW Fusion talk. My name's Sean Nettleton. I'm a technical agronomist at BW Fusion. My job is to introduce Jason Schley, our Chief Agronomy and Product Officer. But before that, I wanted to say our booth number is 2355. If you hear some things here today that Jason talks about and you want to come and learn more, 2355. If you go to the main entrance, just kind of walk in and go to the right. We're right there by the bathrooms, actually. So here's what's going on at our booth. We've got a lot of, so I host our Cropcast, which is our podcast. We're doing live Cropcast recordings throughout the next 3 days. We're going to have in-booth talks like what Jason's going to do today. Several other folks are going to talk about a few different things that we offer. So, and then tomorrow we'll have Kevin Cowell come to do a podcast. We've got a happy hour from 1 to 3. So if you need a drink, come and finish the day of the show out with us. So Jason Schley.
Thank you, Mr. Nettleton. So a little bit about what BW is and why we're relevant, I guess, to me, I'm going to put it in my words. To me, we're trying to be the farmer's partner in ag. It's a time, to me, that we got to bring all of the data together and try to bring value to every operation. And in all reality, that's what we focus on. We focus on what can we do differently than other companies and bring your farm additional value. So today's talk is about efficiency. Again, it's not a product. It's a thought process. It's a mission, and that's truly what we've been on. We continue to see guys that are unwilling to change, and in times that we're in today, we feel like it's because the uncertainty behind it. So we're stacking data, bringing data to the operations to allow people to think differently and to really attack this entire fertility market in a different view. So again, as you look at today's world, right, this is where we're sitting. We're sitting at, you got guys that we know we need to raise the bushels, but we also know that the inputs are so high that it's making things difficult on the farm. So again, when I think about what we're trying to do as a company, what we're trying to do is continue to build upon yields by cutting back. And honestly, it's doable. We're seeing it every single year. We're stacking more and more information to prove that thinking outside the box is actually paying the farmer, actually improving the soils. And again, we won't get through all this in the next 25 minutes, but really the goal is to just stimulate your thought process to think differently. So again, when you think about the U.S. over the last basically 60 years, all we do is continue to apply more and more and more. If you look back in roughly 1990 to 2010, we kind of peaked out on P&K usage there. But if you look at the nitrogen, we just keep spending more, putting more and more on. I believe that we peaked out in those, the reason why the P&K took off in the 1990s is really the technology of grid sampling. When we started to understand that a ppm value, we put this magical ppm level that we thought we all needed to hit, we shot for it, we raised and continued to put more and more on until ultimately we seen that wasn't a return on that investment. On the other side of things, again, that nitrogen, we just continued to push it further and further. And in reality, what we've seen is we continue to gain bushels through that process. So as we push more and more fertility, we were gaining bushels. And today that is not happening any longer. So the last basically 15 years of fertility trials, as we continue to push harder and harder, we're getting less and less return on that same dollar. And the reason that is happening is simply because as we apply more, we're not thinking about it correctly. We keep thinking that if we put, again, the higher these soil tests become, the higher the yield potential becomes. But in reality, we got to wrap our mind around this. It has nothing to do with the soil test. It has to do with how do we create a healthy plant. Healthy plants are what is creating that yield. And it's not about ppms that are creating this healthy plant. It's about allowing that plant to soil synergy, right? It's to provoke that plant to create friends in that root zone. And this is just the story. I mean, Illinois put this data together, but in reality, most people think for every pound that we apply, for every ppm we build in that soil test, that it's going to have a positive impact on the plant. But in reality, this slide shows even nitrogen, what we'd consider probably one of the most simplest nutrients of all. We're only getting 33% of what we apply actually into that plant. And you can see on the bottom right, it basically breaks that down. If it's fall anhydrous, we're looking at 21 cents. If it's at plant in a band, we're getting closer to 50 cents of that dollar. But in reality, 67% of that nitrogen that's going into that crop that year is actually coming from the soil. And the soil, again, think about it this way. The reason that's happening is again, the soil is multifaceted. It's a live, living thing that changes every single day, and it reflects the management of us. So the better we manage our crop for crop health, the more and more that soil is going to pump out and give to the plant. And that's exactly what this chart is showing. And the reason why that's happening is simply this. When you apply nitrogen, this is just an example, by the time you get roughly waist-high corn, a lot of the applied nitrogen is no longer found in a soil test. And the reason that's happening is because it changes forms. Either we've lost some of it due to volatilization, leaching, et cetera, or it's tying into carbon. So when we talk about water extracted organic nitrogen, that's really going to carry us in that rapid uptake stage. And how that water extracted organic carbon is actually affecting things is as we apply the N, and the inorganic nitrogen that we've applied binds with the carbon in our soil system, we've created an organic nitrogen, which is the best form of N you can possibly have because it's stable. The plants can take it up. And then ultimately you get into that, again, shoulder high corn, and your amino acid profile is really taken over. And then finally, we all know that the finish of the crop is probably the most important. That start and then the finish, right? Well, that finish of the crop, honestly, a lot of that nutrient demand, a lot of that nutrient availability is going to come back to how much of that nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, carbon has our biological functions consumed, okay? So what I mean by that is bacteria is a 5-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, okay? So that means for every 5 pounds of carbon that it takes up, it's gonna find a pound of nitrogen, okay? So long story short, the more we stimulate that crop, the more we stimulate that bacteria and that fungi, the more nitrogen we can actually carry over and release when that crop's gonna get the most bang for its buck. So you've probably seen charts like this. This is just real simple. The N and the K uptake really starts to peak out at around that V10. We're all applying either in the fall or the spring, but ultimately what's happening is the uptake curve happens at V10. On the phosphorus side, again, same thing. We're putting most of our phosphorus, zinc, sulfur up front, putting it in the furrow or 2x2, right? For the majority of guys, or dry broadcast, doesn't matter. Point being is we're putting it out there hoping that it's available when this crop needs it. And again, we don't have to hope. We can manage that application. We can manage that crop. We can manage that soil to ensure that we're going to get more out of that dollar as long as we get that biological activity pumping. Because again, I just showed you in the last slide, what's going to drive the availability isn't what we applied. What's going to drive the availability is how active and functioning our soil system is. So this is what typically happens. Guy goes out and takes a tissue test because everybody is pretty much aware, if you have a tissue test guy, that once you get to reproduction, you want to see your max phosphorus uptake. You want to see your max nitrogen uptake, right? You want to kind of peak out going into flowering of any crop. Long story short, if you're short, what do? We apply more, okay? We apply more because we were short last year, so hey, if I put 200 pounds on last year, I'm going to put 235 on this year, I'm going to account for that. Well, the problem with that is the more nitrogen we actually apply, what we're actually doing is creating a soil that's not vibrant, not alive, and it's basically dead. It's a synthetically, chemically driven system at that point. But in reality, I just showed you on the slide before, what we actually want to do is create activity. We want to create microbial growth in that soil so we can store it and release it when the crop actually needs it. And the more excess nitrogen that's sitting in a soil profile, what we're actually doing is killing that soil. And I'll explain that quickly. I talked about the carbon to nitrogen ratio being 5-to-1. When I talked about as that microbe takes up 5 parts carbon, it's got to find a pound of nitrogen. Well, the exact same thing works in reverse. So if I've got excess nitrogen in the soil system, I've got 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds of idle nitrogen, what happens is that the microbes take up that nitrogen, then they got to go find carbon, okay? So when they're finding carbon, what's that actually doing? It's deteriorating organic matters of our soils. So we've been doing this for years and years and years. I showed you the map. We just continue to apply more and more. Well, the more we apply, the more we're going to have to apply because we're creating a dead soil, okay? And again, the reason that's happening is because we're losing this valuable resource called carbon as CO2 into the atmosphere, the more and more N we apply. Phosphorus, again, it's very similar story to the nitrogen, only worse. For every pound that we broadcast, for every dollar that we spend on broadcast fertilizer, and these is university numbers, not ours, you're going to get 5 to 10 cents of that dollar into that crop, okay? A terrible investment. Who in the world, what environment would you spend $1 to get 5 cents back? It just doesn't happen anywhere but ag, honestly. You look at the banded application, we're getting 25 to 35 cents of that dollar back. So again, efficiency comes from placement, right, and timing. This is 21 universities, taking 21 universities and combining all their data, okay? And when we do that at $3.80 corn, if we had a very low testing soil and we actually applied what they asked us to apply, we'd break even, okay? That's at 380 corn. At $4.50 corn, we do have an ROI of 20%. But you can see it doesn't matter if it's P, K, what it is, we're going to have to gain $1.52 in today's environment to actually see those numbers turn green. And that's what we're farming for. We need green numbers. We don't need to build a soil test. What we need to worry about is our return on our investment. And I think too many of us focus on this magical ppm number that we were taught, 50 years ago that was so important. But in reality, it has very little to do with your success as a farmer. This is just spinning that a little bit. This is us taking 4 years to build a soil test to get it to maximum levels, okay? Or to get it to adequate levels, according to the soil test. And when we did that, you can see over 4 years, we did gain $115 by adding phosphorus. We did gain $40 by adding potassium. But in reality, we're spending $280 and $144, so we're losing money every time we did this. So we built this soil test up to this perfect level, according to what everybody thinks is perfect, but we were still losing money. What's the point? What is the point of continuing to chase ppm farming if it's not going to put money back in your pocket? So this is just more data. Again, I talked to you about this is what BW Fusion is. Honestly, we are your partner in farming. And I take great responsibility in making sure that we put the right data together to help a farmer. We never want to lead a farmer in the wrong direction, so we're constantly collecting data. And again, I think we're one of the unique companies that we're spending more money on data that actually helps the farm on N, P, and K, things that we don't have anything to do with selling. We don't sell a single drop of those things, but we put a lot of our money and a lot of our research dollars into this so we can bring value on your farm. But again, I talked about the tissue testing. If you look at that chart, what that's actually showing you is what the plant took up had no correlation to what that soil test said. And that's really what got me into doing what I do today, is because I was trying to be a fertility manager. I was trying to help as a crop consultant to farmers, and I couldn't make sense of what a soil test said it was going to release and what the crop actually seen. So again, zero correlation there. And then Mason, he put 50,000 acres worth of data together here about a month ago. And again, this is just comparing what the soil test said and then comparing to yield. So again, how often did the phosphorus part per million have an impact, a direct impact on yield? We're looking at 10 to 15%. You're looking at pH, 5 to 10%. But yet, when you think about your budgets as a farmer and you think about what you do every single year, those are two things that you're really focused on. You're always focused on your pH. You're always focused on your phosphorus levels. But again, if you're getting 10 to 15% of that to actually impact yield, why is that your biggest focus? It's because that's what you were taught. You were taught that. I was taught that. Everybody was taught that. That's why I said earlier, this What's New session isn't about a product. It's about the mentality of thinking different. You have to think different to truly wrap your head around how can we change this industry for the better? How do we change our farm so we can be profitable in tough times? I can tell you, chasing a soil test isn't going to get you there. This is coming from an owner of a soils lab, okay? It's not going to get there chasing a part per million. It's the thought process. How do we manage through this? And I think this is an important slide to understand. And the reason why it's important is because when I talked about those ppm values and the lack of correlation, what we're actually looking at is that middle pool, that extractable pool. So that's your Bray, your Olson, your Malick, your DDPA, the things, the ammonium acetate, the things that we've been taught to extract the soils with. The left pool, that big, huge pool, that XRF pool, that's where 85% of your phosphorus is going to be, 85 to even greater number than that. And what that is just your bound up phosphorus, okay? It's not truly plant available at that particular point. Outside of that, that's in the microbial biomass. That's also measured within that measurement. And then on the far right, you've got your plant available. So that's when we're mimicking what the plant root exudate is showing in a soil test. And then we report, again, what is in the plant available form at this exact moment. Those numbers are going to interchange. They're going to react. Every day that number is going to look different, okay? And the reason why is simply this, is because the microbial activity is going to change the forms of that phosphorus, okay? It's going to change the forms. The only way that microbial activity actually happens in a soil test, in a soil, is if that plant is, or the microbes are asked to do it. The plants are asking, they're communicating basically with those microbes, and the way they do that is through plant exudation. So the more exudation we create, the more activity we're going to get from our soil microbes, and ultimately the more availability, because we're going to spin those pools more rapidly through the growing season. And that's the goal, because if I just build up a ppm in that extractable part per million, I already said that had very little correlation to yield or what the plant's seen. But what I want to do is spoon feed that crop, right? I want to be able to apply in the spring, but make sure it's available when that crop needs it going into flower. Well, the only way to do that is if I push so much exudation, I build the carbon in that soil system so well that ultimately that I'm creating such a diverse environment that these microbes are always happy and active. The more happy and active they become, the more, again, we're spinning that cycle, and the more availability deeper into the growing season these nutrients become. So again, the liquid carbon, I say this all the time, but I believe this is the foundation to creating efficiency on a farm, is understanding how simple this is. Again, before fertilizers, we still had biomass, we still grew grasses, we still did things, right? Forests survived, you know, there's a lot of things that happened before we put synthetics out there. And the reason that was happening is simply this, is you had a diverse cropping cycle. So in other words, I'll say it this way, if you went out to native grass, and you took a yard of native grass, you'll probably see 50 to 60 species. You've got cool season, you've got warm season, you've got, you know, things that handle, that are legumes, things that are grasses, right? You've got all this diversity. When you have diversity, what the system had that we don't have today is something was always happy, okay? When something's always happy, it's gonna be flourishing. When something's flourishing, it's gonna create more carbon, release more exudation. Today's system's tougher because we've taken it down to one crop. That one crop's not gonna be happy in every environment, too wet, too dry, too hot, too cool, right? You always have something. So our job as managers is truly to help that crop maintain its plant health, maintain its energy so it can continue to do what it wants to do best, which is capture sunlight, create sugars, release the sugars to the root system, stimulate the biology, get fed. It's a simple system, very simple system. PPMs have nothing to do with that system, nothing. There's no correlation. What happens? Okay, if a plant is healthy, I can basically spit out 10 pounds of carbon per day into that root system, okay? What that's doing is stimulate the biology's gonna bring it food. If a plant is stressed, however, you're not gonna release that carbon. And if you are gonna release that carbon, what it's gonna be is a simple sugar, not these complex carbon systems that keeps everything eating in that soil system, the fungi, the bacteria, et cetera. When you go to a simple sugar release, which that's what happens when the plants are stressed, basically what you're doing is basically impacting the negative bacteria. That's why we see a negative fungi, and that's why we see so many diseases happen when that plant gets under stress, or when we overload that plant with nitrate or ammonium. What actually happens to that plant is that plant can no longer basically release exudation. So when I talk about stress, I'm not talking about, you know, a 2-week drought, 3-week drought. What I'm talking about is the common things that each one of us deal with every single growing season. One of the biggest stressors to plants is a plant converting nitrate to a protein. Again, the plant doesn't want nitrate, doesn't want nitrogen in any form other than it wants to get it converted to a protein or amino acids. Point being is, if there's nitrate, because we pushed all of our nitrogen up front, and there's nitrate built up in that plant, and that plant doesn't have the energy to convert it to a protein, there's two things that happen. One is that plant stresses, so it loses a lot of its carbon through respiration because it's stressed out. So you're gonna pump it into the atmosphere rather than into the root system. And the other thing is when you have an incomplete protein, it blocks the movement of sugar down to the root. So there's a lot of negatives that come from just the common thing of overloading the system up front with nitrate. The other thing that all of us have to go through basically every year is we're gonna put a herbicide on. Well, what's that herbicide do? It shuts that plant down. Well, when you shut that plant down, everything that we were trying to build that activity, build that community underneath that plant's feet so we could actually eat later in the growing season with the single application, we're shutting that system down. Okay, we completely shut it down. So we've got to think about the things that we do every single day and how do we help that crop metabolize, move through those tough times in life. And ultimately, I think about this, I love this slide. Again, I believe personally that over time, we've basically built that soil that looks like it's dead. I believe that the more salts we put out, the more synthetics that we push, the less and less the microbes have to communicate with the plant, and the plant has to communicate with the microbe, simply because it's got a buffet of food, so it's just gonna eat the synthetics. So once you lose that communication between the plant and the soil and the microbes, you end up with a dead, unflocculated, poor soil structure situation. If you look at the other side of it, I think that's the reason why you've seen those fertility trends the way we've seen it. So again, if you looked at those trends from the 70s to basically 2010, we could keep putting more and more and more on, and we kept getting a yield response to it, right? So we kept doing it. And then all of a sudden I mentioned, we just plateaued. The reason we've plateaued is simply this. When we kill the soil and we take the biology out, we're not getting fed on the backside. We have to build our carbon levels with our fertility levels for that plant to maximize its nutrition. And ultimately, when you have that dead-looking soil, this is what the outcome is. The outcome is simple. We create a system that no longer is aiding the crop. We're creating a system that it used to be a catch and release system, right? And now it's just a bank. We're throwing fertility out there and it's locked tight. Again, the phosphorus, 75 to 85% of that is going to tie up. Look at how quickly it can tie up. In a dead soil, you're 1 to 6 hours, you're already making an impact. By 21 days, it's very hard to find any applied phosphorus in the plant available form. And the reason why is because it's either tied up or gone, okay? This is real. This happens every single day, and this is the reason why we've plateaued on a lot of our fertility metrics when it comes back to ROI. I feel like this chart probably proves it the best. It's a 30-year chart here, trial, and basically what's going on here is you've got that dark green line. What that dark green line is showing you and representing is when they put manure out, okay? That dotted line is when they took the analysis of the manure. They didn't apply manure, but they applied the nutrition. If you look at it, it's the exact same trend lines we see here in America. You see that you've got this big incline with your first big doses of fertility. Basically 15 years of fertility, you see a response. Then all of a sudden it flattens out. The manure never flattens out. Why? Because the soil had the energy. It had the carbon content to keep this thing cycling. It had the carbon content to keep things from tying up as soon as it hit the ground. And carbon drives all of that, but yet we don't focus on carbon, we focus on ppms. And that's the problem. If you don't focus on it, if you don't measure it, how are you supposed to impact something you have no idea where you stand? So again, we focus on water extract organic carbon because we know for a fact that is the #1 biological food source. It's better than any product you can buy. How do you create it? You create it by managing a healthy plant, taking the stress away from the plant. So again, this is just phosphorus and the nitrogen. The phosphorus is very, very similar. The only difference is when you apply phosphorus, it's going to tie up even faster. So you're going to rely on biological activity even more when it comes to phosphorus than you will of nitrogen. In fact, there's studies that show over 50% of the total phosphorus that goes in the plant is a result of how much exudation that plant did that day. So again, I didn't say that the soil test part per million had a 50% impact. I'm saying when that plant is healthy and active, it can acquire 50% more phosphorus just because of that. There's no soil test levels that I can say that you could increase the uptake by 50%, none. I can take you from a 10 part per million to 100 part per million, you're not gonna increase your uptake by 50%, okay? But think about what I said. But if I create a healthy plant and that plant is asking for it through exudation, stimulate the biology, we can increase the uptake by 50%. So think about that again. When you think about high yield guys, there's gonna be a lot of that this week. That's the beauty of this place. We get to learn a lot. You're going to see that guys do a great job of managing that back half of the plant. Yes, there's going to be split applications involved in high yield typically. But the other thing I just want to make sure that you understand is when I tell you that soil tests don't correlate to uptake, what does is the microbial activity. Think of how well some of these guys are doing at stimulating that bacteria and that fungi, storing that fertility so it can release it when the plant needs it. The other thing I'll say is, again, 60 to 65% of the total yield that we lose in a season or take away from the potential comes from stress. Again, our industry is so focused on offense, but in reality, the biggest bang for your dollar is to be focused on defense. It's stress management, because stress management impacts the offense. We can pour as much money as we want out there, but if we can't tell that plant to go get it, then we're wasting our time and our money, okay? We gotta be focused on ROI, focused on plant health, and that's ultimately gonna drive nutrient efficiency into your crop. So again, there's two ways of thinking about this. Right? I think for too many years we've been focusing on dumping it on, building these soil tests and just expecting these crops to go after it. But in reality, the plants are driving 30 to 60% of that uptake. It's not your soil test, it's the plants. Now granted, the soil test has to be high in certain things. It's got to be high on water extract organic carbon because that's going to drive the function. It's got to be high in biological activity because that's going to create the enzymes that ultimately release that nutrient. So when we apply it, it ties up. We can release it if we're working with the microbes to do it. I feel like a simple window. Again, I haven't brought up product at all, and I'm really not going to do it here either, outside of just philosophy. So you look at the top, I've got the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. I personally think we over-fertilize early. When we over-fertilize early, what happens is that plant doesn't have to communicate with its soil microbes, okay? The reason it doesn't have to, because it says, man, I can sense phosphorus, nitrogen all around me. Why would I have to ask for help, right? If I can push a wheelbarrow by myself, I'm not going to ask. But as soon as it gets heavy enough, I can't move it, I'm going to ask for help. Well, that plant doesn't ask for help if it feels like it can do it. So in other words, our big push at the beginning is to inoculate that seed, because what we want to do is create a relationship early. The faster we create that relationship, the stronger it becomes. Kind of like a childhood friend, right? When you have that great childhood friend, you create that relationship early. That's a bond you keep forever. We want to impact that seed right from the beginning. We want to cut back on the fertilizer up front so we don't stall that out. And then I've got Biocast Max in there. The reason why I did that is because, again, if we can lower the salt load on that front half of the growing season, we give that opportunity for that root to flourish. So again, that cuts back basically 15, 35, 15 on the fertility side. And then if you look at that next window, that's the handshake window, okay? So you created the relationship, but now you want to continue to prove out that relationship means something to you. So you're giving and taking, right? And any relationship is a give and take relationship. Well, when you get into that herbicide window, that V1, V4, V5, V6, right? What we don't want to happen is that plant to stall out. Naturally, what happens in our systems is we get it off to a good start, then we go hammer it with herbicide. When we go hammer it with herbicide, it takes anywhere from 7 to 14 days for that root to start generating again. We've proven this with moisture meters. We put moisture meters in, we can see the root activity, okay? When we spray a herbicide, doesn't matter if it's Roundup on Roundup Ready corn, it's still that plant has to metabolize it. When it's using its energy to metabolize it, what it stops doing is exudating. When it stops exudating, it stops root growth too, because exudation is going to drive that root growth. Wherever sugar moves is where the growth is going to come from. If you can't move the sugar, you're not growing roots. You cannot lose that window, because that's the window that, again, they want to know if this is a real relationship that's going to be sustainable or this is just a flash in the pan. So you started early, you've got to continue to build that. The other thing I'll say is, once that plant becomes an adult, it cares more about its offspring than it does itself, just like you or I, right? We care more about our kids than we do ourselves. Once that plant goes into kernel formation, it will do everything it possibly can to give every ounce of energy and sugar into that offspring, that seed. So again, once you get into reproduction, you can no longer send a lot of this exudation. If you're going to build fat, you're going to build carbon into the soil system, it has to happen between that establishment stage and basically V12, because after that, the plant's demanding more energy than it has, so it doesn't share, okay? And then ultimately on that back half, what we believe is really important is to lower the stress, lower the ethylene. Guys use fungicides all the time. Part of that benefit has been that they reduce the ethylene, because what we're trying to do is set the plant up to be able to move sugars freely. So at the end of the year, again, your roots are taking up a lot of the nutrition until you get into that R2, R3 stage. At that particular time, what ends up happening is that root starts to shut down. The reason the root shut down is because, again, there's no exudation. So what happens is the plant just starts to remobilize nutrition. What it's taken it up earlier, in the lower leaves, it's trying to remobilize it, okay? Well, the only way it can remobilize is if sugars are moving in the plant. Well, ethylene is your biggest stoppage of any nutrients moving in the plant. As soon as that plant gets overwhelmed with ethylene, which is the hormone in the plant, basically what you've done is stop the movement of that plant. So it cannot reallocate. We've built all this biomass, all this storage of fertility, but we can't get it to the grain because the plant is stifled up. The other thing I mentioned is how important nitrogen is late. So what we do in this particular pass is we look at amino acids that can drive the nitrogen utilization, the conversion of nitrate and ammonium to protein. We relax the plant with the ethylene suppressant, and we open up the pathways again. That amino is basically our plumber to allow sugar movement to reallocate to its offspring. So again, we are in 23:55. I know that we didn't get through everything here. Obviously, it's a short window. Really want to invite everybody there, though. We've got a lot of data. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got data that we've collected over the last 3 to 4 years to back up everything that I talked about today. If you're interested at all, please stop through. We'd love to share it with you. This is the reason why we do what we do, is because we believe we can make a difference in ag. Honestly, our entire team, our entire agronomy team, our entire sales team, there's enough people selling you something. We actually truly want to help, and the only way we'll be successful if you find that help on your farm, and we can actually do what we say we're going to do, which is bring value. So thank you for your time. Again, I'll be around here, and then the rest of the 4 days, whatever we're here, I'm in the booth.